right. So welcome everyone. We're going to give folks some time to log on and see the alert that we are now live on Facebook for our Friday's community conversation series here at Peter Paul. Cool. So let's go ahead and get started because we got a lot of good information to cover and some wonderful panelists who are joining us here today. But a good place to start would probably be with introducing myself. My name is Kim Young. I'm the Director of Family and Community Engagement at Peter Paul, and I have the privilege of moderating today's panel on economic strength. And so just a little background about what this community conversation series is here at Peter Paul, we're hosting our summer program, which has a theme of Peter Paul Strong. In each week throughout our six-week program, we have focused on a different strength. So if that has been physical strength, social and community strength, historical strength, economic strength, and then academic strength. And so we're really excited to bring this conversation together to really take a look from various perspectives across generations about what does economic strength really look like and how does it show up in our lives and in our work. And so we have a whole schedule. If you haven't had an opportunity to tune in for the lives, you can certainly go to Peter Paul's Facebook page and view them at your own pleasure. But there are 2 more left after today. Next Friday, we're going to tackle historical strength with another wonderful panel. And then we're going to end the series with academic strength on August 14th. So hopeful that you'll find some time to join us for one of those conversations. So just a little bit about Peter Paul and what the mission is. For those who aren't familiar with the work or just want to get to know us in different ways, we're really here to support Easton families and educate students by equipping them to serve as positive contributors to their families, community, and then society. We do this work through three pillars: educate the child, engage the family, and empower the community. And so why are we actually here today for this conversation? And it's an opportunity to bridge together individuals, organizations, and communities to really start building those connections and engaging in these topical conversations to really move us from a place of just awareness to collective action. As we engage in the conversation, and please feel free to ask questions in the chat box if you are joining us on Facebook Live right now. And of course, with our panelists, we kind of come through with these 3 village agreements of how we're going to be together today. And one is to honor all voices, meaning just share a bit of that air because we don't have a lot of time to get through the conversation. The second is to honor your experiences. So really speaking from one's own perspective and not making general statements or casting general ideas. And that third is to honor purity of motive, that everyone is coming into this conversation today with a good heart. And the intent is not to be harmful or make any statements that can cause somebody to feel a certain way. So this week we got economic strength, and we are joined by a panelist, and I'm going to stop sharing so y'all can see the panelists. We are joined by a wonderful panelist of 4 individuals who are representing various organizations, some representing themselves, but something that really has me excited is each person is representing a different generation. Well, there's 2 from the same generation, my generation, millennials. So I'm excited to introduce you all to our panelists today. The first, Damon Jiggets, who's the executive director of Peter Paul, and is also one of the founding members of the Ujima Legacy Fund, which is a giving circle of Black men here in Richmond. The second one is Fatima Smith, a fellow social worker, whoop, whoop, who is the co-founder of Collective 365, which is a giving circle and network that brings together individuals from various backgrounds, socioeconomic statuses, education levels, cultural abilities, genders, to really take a look at opportunities to positively change and make sustainable and help sustainable communities of color in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area. And then we got Tykeem Cooper, another millennial, who is coming to us as the executive director of Virginia Excel, which is a Richmond-based nonprofit that is focused on the pursuit of educational equity. And then some of my favorite people, Jordan is here. Jordan Walker is here, a youth advocate and Churchill neighbor, and also an Office of Community Wealth Building Junior Ambassador, and somebody holding down Generation Z. And I forgot to even mention that Damon is holding it down for which I got Generation X, right? So we got a nice little conversation that we can have together and begin to really pick apart how economic strength is showing up in various ways. So I'm going to throw the first question out there, and please just kind of answer as you choose to. And if you would like to also just reintroduce yourselves to everyone today before you provide your answer. So the first one I have for you is, when you hear economic strength, what are some of the first things that come to mind? And that's for anyone to answer.
I think money, I mean, that's kind of the first thing you think of was wealth. But also, this is not really a first thought, but also another thought, like generational wealth. That's something that, especially within the Black community, that's really important for me, just that we are not just building up for ourselves. Something that my mom and I talk about a lot is investing back into our communities. So I think it's like that communal wealth, but then also like within families, like within Black families, building that generational wealth. And again, I'm Jordan, I'm 18, I'm a youth advocate, and yeah.
I'll jump in again. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us and participating in this panel. But also everyone out there who who's listening to this. Thank you all for being a part of this this series of conversations. Economic strength to me, as I see it, is the first thing that comes to mind is the ability and willingness to give. So if you feel like you're economically strong, for me, having come from a community that's been somewhat characterized as a recipient population, one of the things that I really love about where I am in my life right now in terms of economic strength is the ability and willingness to give. So that's the first thing that comes to mind for me.
Hi, my name is Fatima. I prefer my name, but if you need a pronoun, it is she and her. And I am really looking forward to learning from the panelists. And for me, economic strength, I'm going to piggyback on both of the previous comments about thinking about generational wealth, as well as like, what can I do to invest, and not just necessarily resources, but also like my time. Because I think sometimes people feel like you can't give unless you have like a big bank account, and just recognizing that for me, that started young, like in 6th grade, I started volunteering, and just recognizing that there's a need, and figuring out where my place was. And so as far as economic strength, just making sure that we're sewing into the community so that even if we don't see the benefit, thinking ahead, thinking of the future is really what pushes me to think more about like my economic strength and how I can contribute.
So hello everyone, I'm Tykeem Cooper, and economic strength for me really boils down to ability and willingness. And I've always thought of it from the perspective of, if I can give anything, like that comes from a place of a strength. So even if it's just a compliment, right? That's something that I have the ability and I'm willing to give someone else.
Thank you so much for that. So even if you're thinking about where you sit in your work, or just in life in general, what do you begin to notice about how others understand economic investments, right? So if that's other nonprofits, individuals, community members, elected officials, what do you notice about how folks are just understanding economic investment?
For me, when I thought about, like, had the first, I guess you could say, when I got pregnant with the idea of Collective 365, a lot of the feedback I got from folks that were in my age group was like, I'm not there yet. Like, give me 10 years and then I can give. And we've all kind of alluded to that of like, what does it mean to be able to invest? And I love what Takeen said about like, it's not always being able to write like a check for $100,000. It might be a compliment, right? And so I think just trying to have conversations with folks about what investment means, and what that looks like, and recognizing that, you know, it can vary based on where you are in your life. And so for me, I am not in a position to donate millions to HBCUs, right? But I am in a position to have conversations with folks in my age demographic, and outside of it, of just thinking of the power of $10. Like if all of my, one of the things I just wrote on Facebook was like, if all of my Facebook friends gave $10, that's $6,000 right there, you know? And so sometimes we always think about it from an individual, but help us like think about investment as a collective. And we're so powerful, where Black people already are innovative, and resilient. And so to be able to come together, whether it's $1 or $100,000, can be powerful. And what we know is that if we don't invest in ourselves, only like 2% of foundation giving is given to Black-led organizations. And so we need to not, we need to know that we don't have to go to the table and beg. We can create our own table, and room, or it might be a circle. It might not even be a table. We might be sitting in a circle in chairs, but know that we can take ownership of what economic investment looks like.
You know, I think what I would say when I think about investments, I think of what is the return on that investment, you know, and kind of to Fatima's point, you know, in terms of how philanthropy supports or doesn't support Black-led organizations, you know, it has a lot to do with, you know, this trust factor, you know, and as far as investors are concerned, you know, they want to see what is the return on the investment. And in some instances, not all instances, and probably not most instances, there's a reluctance to invest in, you know, in our leadership, in our organizations, in our kids, whatever the case may be, you know, and there are all kinds of historical implications around that. And so just really trying to figure out, how do we shift the narrative around the you know, how we define giving, you know, and so that we're not presenting ourselves as like a charity case, but an opportunity to invest. So it's really an asset-based approach, really, you know. So how can we talk about the value of our organizations? How can we talk about the value and the capacity of the people we serve, as opposed to it being a deficit-based approach? Even in communicating with investors, to say, you know, we don't want you to give or contribute or donate. We want you to invest in the lives of these kids, invest in these worthy causes and organizations. So it just really, it really has a lot to do with how we show up at the table. You know, first and foremost, how do we feel about ourselves and our capacity to, you know, contribute value?
Yeah, for me, I think it boils down to like, as someone who has to fundraise in my day job, always trying to make those interactions relationship based instead of transactional. And I think when they're transactional, it's like, oh, you gave me money, thank you, I'll see you next time, instead of, hey, actually, you're invested in this work and it's a partnership.
Yeah, I think to Fatima's point about like not, let me go, I just wrote it down actually. Sorry. About not being able to invest because you feel like, oh, well, I don't have enough. One thing that's really important to me, even being young, I am a young adult, but I'm still very new to adulthood. And so for me, one thing that's important is that I steward the opportunities that I'm given well. I think that even if I don't have, like Fatima was saying, like the ability to write like this huge check or something, I can still steward my education and the spaces that I've been given to advocate for Black people and for people that are disadvantaged. And then also, because of systemic racism, that money isn't being poured into Black communities because there is like, I'm not sure who said it, but about like that trust. It's like, well, Black people, like, how are we going to get something out of it? And then there's like capitalism and like all of those things. And I've been seeing a lot on social media about how when people say things like credible sources, they're often talking about like white sources or like upper, like really higher education, things like that. So it's like, well, if it's not white, like I can't trust it. Like, what are you going to do with it, Black people? Because then you're still operating in these stereotypes of what Black people are going to do with that money. And there's no investment in us as human beings. So I think that from what I've seen from a lot of nonprofits and things, even in Richmond, like it becomes more of either white saviorism or it's like, hey, I have something for you, so you have to take it. And because we're in these at promise communities where it's like, oh, well, you're not on our level, so we have something that you need. Whereas we could be empowering people to actually figure out where they can thrive also. And I think like America in general, whether it's the education system or how inner cities were literally curated for Black people to be brainwashed into thinking that this is all that you can do, like this is all that you can be, and there's no resources given for us to challenge that system and for us to stand on our own 2 feet. Like Fatima was saying, we can't keep waiting for people to say, oh, Black people, now you have a space, now you're able to thrive here. But like we actually have to, the Black people that do have resources, we need to begin to invest in our communities and say, okay, we're going to have to kind of do our own thing because we've waited and waited for a place for us, but we have to begin to like create that for ourselves.
Thank you so much for that. And that leads me to the next question that's not on your sheets, but I'm going to throw it in there. Just Damon and Fatima, given the work that you all have done, Damon with you, the Ujima Legacy Fund, and then Fatima Collective 365, just really wondering if you can, number one, give some folks just some background on those two giving circles, and then the heart and the ideas that led you both to be involved.
I defer to you first.
You didn't see my finger pointing at you?
I did, but I said it first. So I think when you speak, it trumps the pointing of the finger.
That's how this works. Okay. These millennials. All right. Sure. Thanks, Kim, for this for the opportunity to give somewhat of a PSA. And so I will say that if you haven't joined Ujima Legacy Fund, for all my African American men out there, but also I want to give a shout out to the Sisters of Sister Fund, which is our sister giving circle. We've got a wonderful goal ahead of us, and I'll just kind of talk about the future before I kind of tell you how it all began. But we're approaching upwards of $250,000 that we've given out collectively back to our community. So dispelling some of those myths that we've spoken about that Black people don't give, or there are very few ways that we give. We're creating new platforms to do just that and supporting organizations primarily that are led by us and serving kids and young adults that look like us. So really proud about what we've started here in the Richmond community. For Ujima, again, it is a giving circle. By the way, it is now the largest giving circle in the country comprised of gifts from African American men only. This is something that a few years ago, thank you. A few years ago, we reached out looking for advice on how to lift up a giving circle, and found out that we were ahead of the curve. And so there's a lot of shared learning going on across the country now as these giving circles are popping up. But it's $1,100 annually that you give, and you can give monthly. You can give it all in one lump sum. We pull those those resources together, and then we ask for applications. We vet those applications. We do site visits and whatnot, and then we as a collective. If you can imagine 40 to 50 men on a given evening in one singular space trying to make a decision, it's a thing to see, but we've done it for going on 8 years now, and so we're really excited about what we've been able to contribute back into the community. And just for me, being a founding member of it, Kim, it's like I wanted to create a place where African American men, 8 to 80, boots to bow ties, could come together and support each other personally and professionally. And the original premise of it was that we wanted to create volunteerism. We wanted to have an African American male presence in our community. And so we had some philosophical differences, and just quickly it evolved into, hey, I wonder if Black men would be willing to stroke a check. Who knew that there were plenty of Black men out there who had the willingness and the ability to give $1,100 a month? Doesn't sound like a huge feat. And apparently it hasn't been a huge feat. So it's just been growing, and we're just glad to see Sister Fund come behind us and just kind of replicating what we're doing. And so again, we're approaching about $500,000 that we've collectively contributed into the community. I would love to see us cross this $1 million platform in the next couple of years. And so tell all your friends, your colleagues, and associates about it, both of these platforms. And I'm curious to hear more about what Fatima has to share.
Thank you for going first, even though you pointed first. Yeah, I was inspired by Ujima and Sister Fund in thinking of Collective 365. I used to work in nonprofits, and I was never a grant writer, but I assisted the grant writer because I was the director of programs. And just the intense labor that went into preparing a grant, only to either have been told like you're getting half of it or you're getting none of it, and trying to create buzzwords. And to Jordan's point, like we're being told what we need in a way, and you're writing to that, even though like maybe that's really not what you're seeing on a day-to-day when you're on the ground. And so I just got frustrated. I'm no longer in nonprofit in like a formal way. And I reached out to some friends, and I wanted to join. I first came across Impact 100 because of nonprofit work, and then found out that there were Black folks doing this in Richmond. But then I was like, 1,100, that's my mortgage. And yes, it's for the year, but just to think about that, I'm still struggling trying to pay my sorority dues. So just some transparency there. And so I was like, what can be done? And I kept meeting other people my age that were like, I want to give, but I'll wait until I'm like 40 or 50 because I can't afford, 1,100 a year or 1,000 a year. And I was like, no, like we can do something now. And so the other thing that came up for me with Collective 365 was that I wanted it to only be for Black and Brown communities in the DMV. So DMV is near and dear to my heart. I went to George Mason undergrad, lived a little bit in Silver Spring, Maryland. So the DMV, that's my heart. And so that's why we've expanded not to just Richmond, but to the DMV area. And I kept meeting, thankfully, amazing Black women in particular that were doing things in the community. Like a woman from 757 noticed that the kids in her neighborhood, when she would pick up her daughter from the bus stop were either sitting outside their house because their parents didn't want them in the house when they weren't home. So they had to wait a little bit till parents got home, or were going into homes where there weren't computers for them to do their work. And so they were having to walk to the local library. And so she decided to get some used computers and set up a computer lab in her living room for the neighborhood kids. And of course, she can't get funding because she's not a traditional 501c3. And a lot of people don't know it's like $600 to file that application. And so she's just a Black woman who is being responsive to her community needs, like how many million Black women do, right, around the country. And so that was inspiring to me of like, how can we provide money to individuals or grassroots movements who traditionally are left out of funding sources because they're not a 501c3 or they don't have a $250,000 operating budget. And so back to Damon's great point about that trust, and Jordan underscored it as well. People are reluctant. People are like, wait, you're going to give money to just like a person, and what are they going to do? And I'm like, there are grant opportunities that do it all the time where they're like, oh, you want to start a business? Here, we'll give you this money. Hopefully you use it for the right thing, and go with that. Because to Kim's point, as she opened the thing of like coming with pure intentions, right? We want to show that we trust our Black and brown people to meet the needs of the community. And so this is really an exercise in trust, because we don't have, the 501c3 status. Not saying that, and let me just interject, 501c3 status does not mean that you were doing good work. It just means that you have a status by the government. So there's that. And so, sorry, my daughter just came in the room, sorry. Hi. So she is the reason why I wanted Collective 365 to happen, because I wanted to make sure that I was telling folks that we need to invest in the community so that she can have a better community, right? And it doesn't always have to be a formal organization. So one of the things that came up for us when we were thinking about an applicant to speak to the application process was like, someone said, oh, I have a business and I want to hire former felons. And in order to do that, I want to be able to put them through management class, because I want them to succeed in it. I don't want to just say I'm hiring them and then end up firing them because they don't have the skills to thrive in that position. And so that would be an opportunity for somebody to apply. So if I own, I don't know. I'm at Urban Hang Suite. I want to promote a Black owned business. I own Urban Hang Suite and I want to, hire these individuals. So I'm going to pay for them to go through a course. They could apply for a grant to cover the cost of that training for those individuals. So it's things like that. It doesn't always have to be like a program that somebody's doing. It could be like, hey, we have the resources to do the programs, but we need a new roof because we can't actually have the kids in this building without the roof being repaired. So just trying to provide opportunities for like that non-traditional funding. She's back. Hi. To provide those. No. Oh. Please go with grandma. Thank you. Wait. So I'm gonna pause because she's not letting me have this conversation, but I think you get the gist. It's $50 minimum to be a member, but we have donations for any range, any size, we welcome them. And even if you can't pay the $50 to be a member, we ask folks to still complete an application, because one of the components of our grant application is for the applicant to indicate what other services they need support with. And so, for example, Kim might be a part of the collective and is dope with social media if you aren't following dope Black social worker, and so we could connect that person. So even if they're not a recipient of a grant, being like, hey Kim, you're willing to sit down and do like a free consult to help them with their social media. So it's also about building a network, again, of community conscious individuals who, again, giving their money, but also recognizing that they have talent and time that they can give back into Black and Brown communities. So it's kind of twofold, not just giving, but also like pairing people with resources within our community, or maybe saying like doing it at a fraction of a cost because they've applied or what have you. So we just started. We launched July 6th. We're a new baby organization. Today, every Friday we post our financials, and we are at 4,300 out of our $15,000 goal for September 1. So by February 1, we want to have $25,000 raised. So we welcome anybody, and we've had a PSA moment. We've had some white folks reach out and say, like, can I join? The answer is yes, and we have an option for you to defer your vote. So just like Ujima, we vote on how the funds work, but we ask folks that are not Black or Brown to consider deferring their vote to somebody that can't pay to vote, but is a part of the community, right? So we want you to be to the points that were made earlier about like making an investment and not just writing a check. We want you to connect, but also like trying to hold space for folks that want to invest, but maybe can't make that formal investment. So I think that summarizes Collective 365 in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Damon and Fatima, for speaking to that work. And Jordan, I saw your hand up, so I'm certain you want to get a response in. But let's couple your response. But let me throw the next question out there so folks can just think about it, and we can just keep the conversation going. That sound cool? So the next question, just for consideration and response, is like, what appears to be critical issues that contribute to what seems like the permissible nature of economic divestment in at promised communities, right? So I'm gonna throw that out there. Jordan, you can go ahead, and then y'all can just kind of take it from there.
Okay, great. I think what Fatima was saying about how oftentimes where the money comes from, which is often from these white organizations and people that have the money because of systemic racism. I think when it comes to like, oh, well, Black people, brown people, people of color, what are you going to do with it? I think it's really like at that moment, you're not really looking to invest in these people as human beings. I've been talking to a few people, and one thing that they said was that actually, I was watching a video, I think it was from Harvard. It was a doctor. He was talking about just like COVID-19 and how there was like a specific city that was like doing really poorly with it. And that pretty much like the nurses and everything, he was saying like, we need to listen to the people that are on the ground that are actually experiencing and dealing with this issue. But he was saying that what happens when it comes to funding is that the people that are in those positions to make those decisions, oftentimes when it benefits a community, there's more pushback as to like why you can't get that money. There's all this red tape because there's none of that, like, again, that return on investment that Damon was mentioning. Like if there's not going to be this huge monetary like return for us, which again contributes to capitalism, then we're going to give you a bunch of excuses because America, the way that America is set up is so individualistic and selfish. And it's like, well, we can't invest into these people so that they can thrive unless we're going to get, some sort of money back. And I think Fatima also said about like the lady who was taking it upon herself to say like there's an issue within my community, so I'm going to do something about it, even if I have to be out of pocket for it and like sacrifice my own space. And I think on the town hall I did last week, someone was saying that there are Black people, brown people, Latinx people that are in our communities. We're noticing these issues, but oftentimes what happens is that these nonprofits and things like they will come in to kind of save us and then like listen to what we say for the sake of like they'll listen to what we say. They'll say, hey, we want to hear you, often in reaction to something that happens, whether it's Black Lives Matter or communities of color that are struggling like on a national level. Then there's a reaction to say, hey, we want you to come speak, we want to hear what you have to say. but then those people in power move ahead without us, and there's nothing for us to hold them accountable. But it's like, okay, we'll hear what you say and kind of twist it to make it like what we want to do with it. So then you have these people in the community that would be better served to lead and actually know what needs to be done for their community, but other people come in and try and like do that work for them. So that's when, like you were talking about the question that you just asked about that divestment, it's more of, oh, we don't want to listen to the people within the community to tell us what they need, but like Fatima said, we're being told what we need. So people will come in and say, hey, like at Promise Communities, like we're going to let you know what you need. You have to take it because you're in this terrible position. But there's never anything to say, no, we want to empower you with resources so that you all can lead each other and help each other and begin to build that communal strength and also that generational wealth, and let each other know, okay, this is what needs to be done, and actually giving people within communities the access to do that.
I don't know how y'all gonna follow that, but you can go ahead and figure it out. Because Jordan just dropped the mic.
So let me just go ahead and go on record. I'm gonna let Takeem take over here, but I'm officially a fan of Gen Z. Sorry, millennials, y'all all over the place, but you know, the fact that I keep running into these Gen Z kids who are so woke, please believe that these kids are ready to lead, and we just need to get them the keys to the car. Thank you for that, Jordan.
Of course, thank you.
Tell him to use his economic strength and write you a check, right?
Because millennials don't got it. We got student loan debt, Jordan. We can't help your generation out, but the Generation X got y'all.
Since we calling out in here. No, you know, I think one of the, like when I think of the critical issues, I think part of it, I say it as a joke, but it really comes down to the whole economic strength piece. I think in some ways, like, it's a little bit different when you come to the table and you're like, hey, I gotta make payroll. I'm willing to take whatever you give me, instead of like when you come from a place of economic strength. I think like you can be selective and say, hey, like I don't have to take their money or his money or that organization's money. And so I think that's one of the issues. Another issue is, and this is something that I kind of ran into, like when I started my job, I didn't know anything about fundraising outside of political fundraising. And so I didn't understand development and how really like how to really build those relationships. And, you know, I grew up kind of in a generation of like, you should get a 501c3 and then people give you money because it's a tax write-off. And the truth of the matter is, like, there are thousands of places where people can give their money if they just want a tax write-off. So like, how do I really earn your trust and position my work in front of you, and then come from a place of strength and say, hey, like, will you partner with us and create through an investment? And so I think it's just a little bit different. I'm no longer in a place of like asking or begging. Now it's more so like, how can you can join us and you can help us do this work in this way. And so for me, like when I think about development, some trial and error, some training, and I think that's something that we can do. Like as we talk about Gen Z and helping prepare them to lead, like how can we help coach them and mentor them?
I'll say this. So there's this. So there, I think what's hurting us in terms of this divestment question, Kim, has a lot to do with there's so much credibility and trust in what is perceived to be a best practice. All right. So you have these academics, you have these scholars, you have these suits and ties that sit around some boardroom table or in some classroom, and they construct all of this literature around topics and issues that are adversely affecting communities like the East End. And then they write these grant applications for millions of dollars, and they siphon off 60 to 70 to 80% of that money. And then the pennies that are left over trickle into the communities that, that they have extracted this information to write the literature and become published and receive all the funding. And then there's no reciprocity of information that makes its way back into the community. And so what you have is that there's this perceived merit in supporting something that someone defines as being a best practice, when if you've been doing this for as long as many of us have, you know that you cannot prescribe a best practice to a particular community. It's not a cookie cutter type of approach when you're talking about community development, when you're talking about community reinvestment. It's not a cookie cutter approach, particularly when you haven't been in these communities. You don't have the lived experience. You can't relate. You're not aware of the dynamics and how so many factors are impacting value systems and how people move and how they adapt and all these kinds of things. And so when you're talking about a divestment, one of the things that, I even struggle with in my role and, at Peter Paul is, again, painting a picture that's more than just numbers, because it's easy to invest in anybody's grant application that just tosses a bunch of numbers out there, right? But are they really about the work? Are they really listening to people in the ways where you're listening to what's being shared with you, right? And you're using that information to give it back to the people. You know what I'm saying? It's a support type of an approach that we haven't quite figured out as a nonprofit sector. It's really kind of responding to the whims and the trends of all these authority figures or these decision makers and influencers out there who, are so far removed from the reality. You know what I'm saying? But we feel compelled to do it because, kind of like Takeen said, we've got to get the money. But I think it's an obligation, particularly for organizations, even like a Peter Paul, and we're flexing our muscles and growing some muscles around this to really be like, I will stop the madness. Let me inform and educate you, funder, on what's really important and what's really impactful and what the community is specifically asking for. So right now, let me just give you an example. So we're working with the school district and the city and a number of corporations and foundations who want to support families as everybody's going back to school, right? And they're preparing to throw millions of dollars at what they perceive to be the most important thing, right? When what we know is, if we listen to our parents and people from the community, they're asking for and needing something totally different. So, isn't it our obligation to say, stop the madness, let's listen to the people first and respond to what they are asking for? Or do we want to come up with what we think they want and what we think they need, throw millions of dollars into it, and then be looking around at the nonprofits like, well, why didn't we save the world? And so when you talk about a divestment, it has way more to do with a perceived merit than actual merit.
And I think the point that you're even getting to, Damon, is around the permissible nature of these divestments have to do with the perception, right? So moving us along, and you all have already kind of touched on this and some of the commenting back and forth, but just thinking about the generations that are represented on this call today. What concerns you, or I'm gonna layer all the questions together. So like, what either concerns you, what gives you hope, what excites you about the relationship between Generation X, the millennials, and Generation Z? So what either concerns you, excites you, and gives you hope about the relationship across these generations?
Well, okay. I think as a young person, like, I've seen this on like both sides of the spectrum. So on one side I'm lucky, like so privileged to have like a lot of youth advocates that are adults that are either millennials or Gen X, and even higher, that are really investing into students, and not from a place of like, this is what you need to do, or like in a punitive way, but they're really empowering myself and my peers to really like be leaders now, but then also when we're in these positions of power that you kind of can only get to when you're an adult, they're really pouring into us that way. And then on the flip side of that, I've also experienced adults who do take on that like punitive dismissiveness. I've experienced it a couple times over the past few months, as I've been speaking and sharing and a part of different panels and things. And what happens is that when, for me specifically, like when I've held these leaders accountable, then they've kind of like flipped it back on me or said, oh, well, this, or someone else will come along and say, oh, well, this person doesn't really have that much power over this, or like telling us, like myself and my peers, like, oh, well, you need to keep in mind that this one person doesn't have all the power to do this, or it becomes like this passive aggressiveness when you hold someone accountable. And I've seen that a lot. Where I've been invited to spaces, or people have come to spaces with the intent to listen to us and say like, oh, we want to hear from students. But what happens is that we kind of get dismissed, and ageism is so real. Like, just like the way that young people's voices are dismissed and kind of like, oh, well, like, it's not even like, I don't even know how to explain it. It's like, because it's so pervasive and it comes out in so many ways. I think the thing that frustrates me the most is when I am invited to a space, or my peers are invited to a space, especially like what's happening now with Black Lives Matter and just police brutality and everything. A lot of these things are very reactional, especially from like a white standpoint. Like, they're very reactional to me, and so I'm already processing it that way. But when I, as a Black woman, come in and share my experiences, when my peers as Black people and people of color share their experiences, and then we kind of are expected to engage, they say like engage, like make sure you're asking questions, answering questions and things. But then after that, we don't get to be a part of the process of what like taking action to what we've actually been saying looks like. And when we ask and say, oh, hey, how can we, like, you know, keep each other held accountable, like how can we still walk with you, because this is actually something important to us beyond this 1 hour conversation, like, then it's like, oh, well, you know, we can promise that action is going to happen. Or it's like these very surface level responses, but there's nothing really, for at least my generation, that I haven't seen a lot of that accountability, where we're actually, like, as we're having these conversations where and I'm grateful for the people that have done it, because a few people have reached out and said like, hey, after these things, like, I want to continue to work with you because these are things that need to get done. But from like a more negative standpoint, there is a lot of dismissal of young people. And I'm sure even with millennials, like, there's just like this, oh, you're young, so like we want to do it our way. And especially like this like boomer generation, they're kind of so stuck in their ways and like what they want to do, that I'm just like, can y'all just go ahead and like move out of the way so that we can actually do what we're trying to do? Like, because it seems like y'all are all in power and we're having to deal with like y'all still stuck in these same mindsets, and we're actually trying to move forward. So that's just my 2 cents. So
I'm here for all the sense you were giving right now.
I'm like, you said it, I didn't say it, but how about for others? Like, what either concerns you, gives you hope, or excites you about the relationship across these generations, especially thinking about what our collective power could look like in terms of economic strength and investment in our communities?
As far as what excites me, like, for real, like, Jordan, like, this is my first time meeting you, and it's, as a Black woman and a Black mommy, like, oh, you are just like goosebumps filling me up today, because it, I just was sharing with someone, like, it's always been like rough as a Black woman, but then to add motherhood has been like another layer of like y'all not gonna have my baby. Like, we just gonna, even after COVID, we just gonna stay up in this house. And so I think just like opportunities like with Peter, Paul, Kim, putting those voices together in an intentional way, I think that's hopeful. And like the willingness for, even if we don't see eye to eye, um, the willingness to, in community, my experience has been that we're still able to still pull some nuggets out of it, even when I'm not like 100% riding with you. And so that gives me hope. But really, Jordan and that crew, that generation of just being like, no, because I didn't have that at 18. I was like, where do you want me to go? Like, I just was like, yeah. And so I think that's hopeful. And why it's hopeful to me, just for some context, is being able to look back, like when Mimi Jones passed this week, right? And reading, like, I knew she was young, but seeing like 18 jumping in a pool, like what was I doing at 18? You know what I mean? Like, not to dismiss my youth, but like, it's just a reminder of like, that's who were creating change, were the people that were 18. And to Damon's point, and everybody, as far as like referencing like people with lived experiences, like they're the ones in the schools, you know, so like honoring their truth. So yeah, so thank you, Jordan, for sharing. And I just thank you for filling me up in ways that I didn't know I needed today. So that's more of a selfish thing than probably answering Kim's general question.
No, it's okay. I think like for me that's really encouraging because in like my journey specifically, I've experienced, like I said, two very different experiences of when I'm interacting with other adults that are like older than me, even though I am technically an adult, I'm not like an adult. And I think like there are times where I'm like, dang, like, am I talking about this too much? Or like some people, there'll be like those one or two people that are like just like gaslighting or like well, you know, like giving like these surface level answers and not really listening to actually act well. So yeah, that was really encouraging for me also. So thank you so much. I appreciate your support. Thank you for having me, all of it.
So I'm going to throw this last question out there. And it still connects to the previous one if you want to find a way to weave some sort of response in. But we're living in this moment, right, where there's calls and demands to divest from police and fund Black futures, right? That's kind of the tagline. What role do you see, or could you see each generation playing in making this a reality?
So I'll try to run through this pretty quickly here because I know we're running up on time. But yeah, it is a good tie into the previous question. I'm excited. I'm excited. I look at it like this. You've got the boomers who I characterize as being like the philosophers, and you've got my generation following behind them. As the strategist, and both of those generations do way too much talking. All right, I get it. We can talk ad nauseum about what needs to be done and all those kinds of things. And then you've got the millennials who are the doers, they're the implementers. They just like, all right, just give me the keys and let me drive this thing, get out of the way. And then what I love about, Gen Z is this passion. They're using their voice, they're challenging what they see as wrong and even questioning like, what are these previous generations been doing that we now need to clean up? And so, so it's all good. I mean, and so you take all of these protests that are going on right now, and it's because of the millennials and the Gen Z and all of the energy that's been generated around these causes that have generated economic investments, back into, communities and back into organizations that can really lift up the voices of these two generations again, and so that right there, Lynn, it creates that level of credibility You know, it's so strong of a voice and passion. And I feel like my generation, even if we're the influencers or sitting in certain seats at this particular moment in time, we have an obligation to really support and complement what's going on with, you know, your two generations and whatnot. We have an obligation to really support you all and let you all drive, you know, this effort, because the economic, you know, the economic uh, lens or whatnot is definitely changing. And so I'm excited about it. I think the thing about it is that we've got to realize who we are generationally, and then respect each other generally and generationally. And then we've got to unite ourselves. I really feel like, you know, even more focused outward, we've got to focus inward as a people and really use our talents and gifts, you know, for collective impact.
Yeah, I think if I had to like really say what excites me, kind of going back to the last question, in one word, I would say like the potential. Because I think of the people like the Jordans and that I have the privilege of working with, and the potential that they have and the things that they're pushing for. But I think as we kind of look at generational responsibilities now, I think in some ways, I'll start with millennials. It's important for us to kind of build a bridge between boomers and Gen Z. Um, and I think that like kind of going back to you know, my theory of advocacy, but I think the boomers, they really need to be the resources right now. And I think we really have to cultivate and mentor Gen Z with their passion and their activism. And then like, how do we kind of connect the two? And so like, how do we support these young folks who are out marching with resources to amplify their voices? Um, and so I think really it's important for us now, and it's critical for us to really like build a team. Um, and then we decide, hey, like this is the thing that we're really pushing for, and like how do we work collectively among generations to accomplish that goal?
Yeah, I love that. I've been like, what I think when I think about this question is like, again, like that generational responsibility. Um, I love what you said talking about like boomers like needing to be the resources right now. I think that let me see, I just wrote it down. So like I often say that like we have to like infiltrate the system from the inside and from like the outside. So when I think about like just all these different like power structures and these isms and how like some groups have like more privilege than others, what I think of is like if you have a privilege in one way, so like if you think about like being like an older adult, like I think if you are in these spaces already, that's when you kind of like, they call it like holding the door open for people that may not be able to like just get into that door just by virtue of the fact that they have this characteristic, identity, whatever it may be. um and I think that like Talkeem was saying, like if we really focus on like what our like, or no, sorry, Damien said this, like what our roles are, like who, what makes up our generations and like who we are. And I think even millennials and Gen Z, I know for at least for Gen Z, like we almost have this reputation of being so woke and passionate. But if there are any Gen Zers or like on this like call right now, like I think like sometimes we're too woke and passionate where it's not really rooted in substance. It's still very surface level, like we're supposed to be woke, like we're in the age of like mental health is normal, like we have a lot of fluidity in our sexuality, like we didn't know about race, like all of these things, but it almost becomes like we're too woke that we really miss like the roots of what we're actually fighting for. So we're just kind of like out here like protesting, like saying Black Lives Matter. I've seen it with so many different demographics. Like we're so busy like buying into almost this reputation of who we're supposed to be that we don't really even know what we're fighting for. So I think like that education is important, but then also like, sorry, I'm trying to remember what I said. Like we all have to use like the skills and resources that we have, because I've heard like I'm not sure who said it, but she was pretty much saying like when we're she used the example of like white supremacy, like when we're combating white supremacy, people of color, like our individual communities have so much hate between us and so much division that white supremacy is literally like, I think of it as like growing fat off of that division, because it wants us to fight, because then we're not going to focus on the fact that white supremacy is the issue that's affecting all of us. And same here, I can draw the parallel of if Gen X and millennials and Gen Z are so busy like fighting each other to say who gets to be the leader, and like who gets to be out on the ground, who gets to be protesting, who gets to be giving the resources, then the systems that we're trying to actually combat, we're not going to be able to do anything, because we're so busy trying to figure out like who gets to be like the leader and like who gets to be at the forefront, instead of like actually humbling ourselves and saying, okay, what skills do we have? Like what resources do we have? What doors are, like what rooms are we able to be in by virtue of the fact, like whether it's our age, race, whatever it may, gender, whatever it may be, and how can we use those things to actually lay them down to like actually build each other up, so that we're actually like this unified front, and like they were saying, like building a team of people that are saying like whatever our privileges may be, we're leveraging those privileges so that we can all work together as a unified front against the systems that we're actually trying to combat.
Thank you for attending the Jordan Walker TED Talk. We all now have the tools that we need. Yes to all of that.
Thank you to each of you so much for your time today. I don't know if folks have any closing words or thoughts, or if you wanted to surmise your experience in this conversation in 5 to 7 words. I'll leave space for that, and then I'll just swing back around and close us out. But if anyone just had any closing words or thoughts.
For me, I just want to say again, thank you to the panel and Kim and Peter Paul Development Center for creating this space to engage, educate, and advocate. And also for those that joined in later, I am one of the co-founders for Collective 365. And if you're interested in learning how to invest your time, talents, and resources in Black and Brown communities in the DMV, check us out at www.collective365, as in the numbers, .org. And again, just a charge to share this message with at least 5 people, whether it's over a Zoom conversation, a text message, but we need to keep these conversations going and exploring how we can grow economically.
I'd say, again, like, thank you so much for having me. I think this the idea of like intergenerationalism, like that wasn't really something that was on the forefront of my mind until recently, until like millennials and like Gen X have been inviting me into spaces. And just like seeing like you all's like heart for that connection like between the generations, it's something that like I didn't even notice was something that we needed. So thank you for having me as a part of that, Kim, and like thank you all for like being so supportive and for the work that you're doing. And also to anyone watching, I just say like really like continue to educate yourself. Like this conversation like goes into so many other like nuances and things, so like continue to self-educate things that you may have heard, look them up, like find other resources. And also like as we're having these conversations and things, I think like especially right now we're all having a lot of conversations, but like really begin to think, and this is even for me, like thinking how we can actually take this action out into the rest of the communities, because there's so many other people that are feeling the same things and don't have language for it, or they don't have a platform to share. So just like how can we begin to also go out into our communities and say, hey, we want you to be a part of this, we all need to be working together to actually combat things well.
I'll just say, again, thank you, Kim, and for all of the panelists for being here today and pulling this together. I really appreciated the conversation. So thank you for having me as well. And, I'll leave you with a scripture, actually. All right. So it's from 2 Timothy. It's something that I truly believe in. And it essentially goes, fan till the flame your gifts from God. And so when we're talking about an economy should not only mean, monetary gifts. We all have gifts and talents that we can give of ourselves that contributes to an economy of sorts, if you will. And so, I think we all have an obligation to give of ourselves, and it should not be, reserved for the affluent. Anyone can give, and and so that's valuable to our economy, and to ourselves and our well-being. So continue to be the blessings that you all are, the gifts that you all are, and look forward to fighting the battle alongside you all for years to come.
So I'm gonna try to follow directions, Kim. I know you said
I
5.
was like, did nobody follow the directions? But that's all right. It was all good words. Go ahead.
Thank you all so much for having me, and it was a pleasure to be with you all today. So thank you.
No, yeah, like this was an amazing conversation. I'm a firm believer that we need intergenerational collaboration to get anything done. No one generation can get it done alone. No one generation is right on their own. And that we definitely have to make more opportunities to coalesce across generations and then mobilize towards action, based off of like where each of our generations are situated and whatever power we have amounted individually to make it more collective to really drive the change that we want to see, and demand the change you want to see in the communities that we serve. So for everyone, thank you for joining us today. Hopeful that you'll find an opportunity to plug in for the next 2 sessions that we have left on next Friday, and then the following Friday after that, August 14th. And just as a reminder, the conversations are, yes, just conversations with the goal of moving to action. We don't just converse just to be talking. We are talking to move to collective action. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll hopefully see you next week.